I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it myself, someone whispered at gate G13 that bustling afternoon. Yet here he is, stuck in the middle seat. Those words hovered in the air like a dark omen, puncturing the normally cheerful hum of pre-flight anticipation. It was the sort of comment that made people glance around, half curious, half concerned, wondering who or what could have triggered such disbelief. To Colonel Hank O'Connell, a quiet man of 83 years, found himself in the center of that passenger's stunned remark. Tall yet slightly stooped, he carried a humility that almost obscured the storied history behind his unassuming presence. One might notice only his kind blue eyes, or perhaps the meticulously pressed collared shirt he wore, but few would guess he was a retired officer who had served with unwavering valor decades ago. His granddaughter had once told him, with a proud grin, "Grandpa, you're the bravest man nobody notices," a line that always made him chuckle. Now, as he stood at the gate podium, holding a flimsy boarding pass for seat 32B, Colonel O'Connell fought a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. That paper slip mocked him, contrasting sharply with the crisp first-class ticket he had carefully guarded since it was first confirmed. For months, he'd carried it like a promise. He had expected a rare ounce of comfort during his journey east for a significant ceremony in capital city. It wasn't mere indulgence. He was headed to a military commemoration honoring people like him who had sacrificed far more than most could fathom. After all the wear on his body over the years, especially the lingering back pain from an old war injury, he simply hoped for a smooth flight without cramped seats or added stress. Yet here he stood, hearing those dreaded words from the gate agent. "We've had to reseat you in economy due to an equipment change and a reduction in first-class capacity," the agent recited in that glazed-over tone employees sometimes use to shield themselves from confrontation. She looked at him with polite detachment, as though he were just another statistic in a sea of inconvenience. Cliffhanger, #1. Colonel O'Connell's hand tightened around his old first-class pass for a split second, the slip of paper that seemed to prove he had once grasped something better. Was it possible that nobody could fix this? Or was there something deeper at play? He was no stranger to adversity. Born in a small town, he'd learned early on that life often took unexpected twists. He'd rolled through them like a seasoned boxer, always bouncing back, never one to cause a scene. But as the agent droned on about policy and unavoidable circumstances, he felt a slow burn of disappointment and sadness. After all, he wasn't seeking special treatment to flaunt old accolades. He simply wanted a measure of courtesy for what he had endured and for the mission that lay before him. Years ago, during heavy gunfire in a conflict overseas, Colonel O'Connell had disregarded his own well-being to drag the wounded to safety. He'd risked it all multiple times in a single night. For that, a grateful nation had honored him with its highest military distinction, though he rarely mentioned the medal he'd earned. It was tucked away in his wallet, accompanied by official citations and quiet memories that could still make his heart pound if he thought about them too long. He recalled the roar of helicopters overhead, the biting sting of debris in the air, and the desperate cries of injured comrades. Even after decades, the echoes of that chaos sometimes visited him in the small hours before dawn, pulling him from fitful sleep. But now, gazing at the agent's forced half-smile, he realized this was a different battle, a more mundane one, yet it stung in its own unique way. His granddaughter, Captain Alex Hunter, had spent months saving up airline miles and scraping together funds to give him this first-class ticket on SkyCon's Airlines. He'd told her it wasn't necessary, insisted he'd muddle through just fine in economy, but she'd been adamant. "Grandpa, you're heading to a ceremony filled with distinguished service members. You deserve this comfort. Let me do this for you." She had used every discount, every trick, to make sure seat 2A was his, a roomy corner, near the window, ready to accommodate his tired back and creaking knees. Yet a simple twist of fate and a new aircraft had apparently undone all her kind effort. Cliffhanger #2. "Sir, I really do apologize," the gate agent said, though her eyes flicked between the computer screen and the growing line behind him, impatient passengers waiting to check in. "But we have no first-class seats available now." For a moment, Colonel O'Connell's voice failed him. Then, summoning his last shred of resolve, he quietly explained why the seat mattered. "I'm traveling for an official event. It's not some vacation I can reschedule." He lacked the brashness to mention his medal right away. He disliked drawing attention to it, even though Alex had insisted it was clearly noted in his reservation profile. The agent offered him the same unyielding stare, this time with the well-worn phrase, "I truly understand, but seat assignments are not guaranteed, sir." He stood there, feeling a chill ripple through him that had nothing to do with the terminal's air conditioning. The lines from the agent's script reminded him of the fleeting loyalty he'd seen in corporations, a soft apology that evaporated as soon as it was uttered. Trying not to let frustration tip into anger, he stepped aside to let the agent assist other travelers. Many of them were just as eager to board as he was, and he hated holding them up. He glanced down at the plastic seating area beyond the gate. Rows of chairs held weary passengers scrolling on phones or flipping through magazines. He found a seat in the corner, wanting to distance himself from the crush of the crowd. Cliffhanger, #3. The question circled in his mind. Did he have any recourse, or would he give in and slump onto that narrow seat in row 32, middle seat, as if it were all he deserved? He inhaled a slow breath, reminded again of the ache in his lower spine. Part of him felt uncharacteristically defeated. Was there truly no one to talk to, no official who could understand what this meant? He remembered the constant reminders from his granddaughter that day she presented him with the ticket, telling him all about the special helpline for recognized heroes the airline allegedly offered. He remembered how she beamed when describing it. "Grandpa, if anything goes sideways, call this number. It's meant for people like you, so the airline knows you're traveling for a significant reason." He tucked that number away more out of courtesy than genuine belief he would need it. He wasn't the type to use special hotlines or VIP treatment. Over the years, the spotlight never sat well with him. Still, if the airline itself had established a department specifically for veterans or honorees, maybe one phone call could straighten this out, or at least preserve the dignity he felt slipping through his fingers. At that moment, the overhead speakers chimed, announcing final boarding for another flight, drowning out the swirl of voices in the vicinity. Colonel O'Connell closed his eyes for a second, savoring a memory of the granddaughter who had tried so hard to make his trip comfortable. She had been so proud, so determined, that her aging grandfather would not have to twist into a cramped cabin seat. That memory alone gave him enough push to open his wallet and find the note card with the special phone number. Written in Alex's neat handwriting, it read, "Sky Concourse Heroes Desk, Direct Assistance." Reading it revived a small glimmer of hope. He dialed. "Sky Concourse Airlines Heroes Desk, this is Matteo speaking," answered a bright alert voice. No automated prompts, no please hold, a real person right away. Cliffhanger #4. Colonel O'Connell exhaled in silent relief. Could this man help, or would he simply check the same system the gate agent had used, reasserting the same hopeless news? There was only one way to find out. Softly clearing his throat, the colonel explained, "My name's Hank O'Connell. My reservation code is QN4X56. I was supposed to be in seat 2A, first class on flight 622 to Glendale, departing from gate G13, but I've just been issued a new pass for 32B, because the plane changed apparently. I'm traveling for an official event in the capital. I can handle a lot, but I do have some physical limitations from my service. I was hoping there might be some solution." Matteo grew suddenly attentive. "Colonel O'Connell, I do see your original booking. It looks like you were set up with a confirmed first-class seat for a significant reason. Are you traveling on behalf of an event honoring veterans?" "Yes," Hank admitted, feeling a flutter of cautious optimism. "I'm heading to a ceremony with the Secretary of Defense, among others. My granddaughter paid extra to ensure I'd arrive rested." The gate agent brushed me off. Matteo offered a gentle but firm response. "Sir, please stay near gate G13. Let me escalate this. I'll call you right back, so be sure to keep your phone close. We're not going to leave you in 32B, I can tell you that." That promise carried a sense of urgency, one that made Colonel O'Connell's pulse quicken. He marveled at how swiftly the tone shifted when dealing with this specialized desk. Military men knew well how a single direct line could make all the difference in the midst of chaos. Even so, wariness lingered. He'd witnessed more than a few bureaucratic tangles in his lifetime, and sometimes "I'll take care of you" still led nowhere. He ended the call, carefully tucking his phone back into his coat pocket. After all, it could take a few minutes for them to coordinate anything. He was just grateful they had listened. Slowly, he rubbed the back of his neck, muscle memory stirring up faint recollections of far more dangerous times when everything hinged on the right radio transmission. In those days, every second was precious, and the slightest communication error could cost lives. This situation was decidedly less life and death, but it still involved a form of respect that every soldier needed to keep intact. He silently thanked his granddaughter again for insisting on that direct number. Now, Colonel O'Connell surveyed the gate once more. The digital display above the counter blinked. Flight 622, on time. Economy zones were due to begin boarding soon, and the overhead speakers repeated instructions for which groups should line up first. That was when the colonel spotted the same gate agent. Her name tag read, Marisa, whispering rapidly with a colleague. They cast furtive glances in his direction, perhaps still aware of the middle seat fiasco, yet neither approached him to offer updates or sympathy. Cliffhanger #5. Once again, doubt crept in.
What if the hero's desk was just another hollow promise, and no one would come through in time? He turned his gaze to the wide airport windows, noticing planes taxiing out on the tarmac against a pastel sky. In a flash, he remembered nights he'd spent in cramped aircraft hangars half a world away, sometimes scrawling urgent letters home by lantern light. Despite the heartbreak of war, those letters had always ended with a note of calm optimism. He resolved to hold on to that same optimism now, for the sake of his granddaughter, if nothing else. 6 minutes ticked by with no word from Matteo. Then 7. Colonel O'Connell checked his watch, a time-worn piece he'd received from his wife decades ago. Soon, the standard announcements would come telling people to store their carry-ons and confirm seatbelts. People were already forming lines, eager to stow their roller bags. A mother struggled to calm a fidgety toddler near the seats at the far end of the waiting area. An elderly couple rummaged through a plastic bag of snacks, dividing them before flight time, and there sat Colonel O'Connell, with a far heavier burden in his heart than a mere bag of pretzels. Then came the clamor. Without warning, a knot of airline employees in suits and ties, some wearing badges designating corporate titles, burst into the gate area. At the very front strode a tall man with graying hair, a slightly panicked expression on his face. His expensive wristwatch glinted under the fluorescent lights. The urgency in his stride cut a swath through the throng so dramatically that even the most impatient travelers paused mid-step. He marched straight to the gate podium, ignoring the startled stares of other employees. Marissa froze, then blanched as he demanded, "Where is Colonel Hank O'Connell?" Cliffhanger #6. In that moment, the colonel realized everything was about to change. But would it be for the better or worse? Approx 700 words for this segment. The tall man's voice cut through the airport din. "I'm Wallace Bergman, CEO of Sky Concourse," he stated, rapping the countertop with tense knuckles. "One of you must know where Colonel O'Connell is." His intense gaze roamed the seating area until it landed on Hank, who remained seated near the windows, wearing a puzzled and slightly wary expression. Swiftly, Bergman strode over, followed by 2 other high-level executives whose faces bore a mix of agitation and concern. The CEO looked flushed, perhaps from speed walking through rows of travelers, but also from the sense of outrage that practically radiated off him. "Colonel," he said quietly, inclining his head in greeting, "I'm Wallace Bergman. I cannot apologize enough for what you've endured here today. This entire situation is unacceptable, and we're going to fix it right now." At such grand declarations, the airport crowd, usually lost in its own frenzy, began to hush. Curious onlookers shifted their seats or craned their necks for a better view. Marissa and another gate agent hovered behind Bergman, their eyes downcast, possibly realizing their earlier dismissal of Colonel O'Connell was rapidly spiraling into a crisis far above their pay grades. Cliffhanger #1. Would this storm of authority resolve Hank's situation, or would the complexities of corporate policy win out in the end? Bergman drew a sharp breath, steadying his tone. "Colonel, I won't let you sit in a middle seat in the back of the plane. It won't happen. Right now, we're halting the boarding process to ensure you receive proper accommodations befitting your service." He glanced at a senior vice president in a dark blazer. "Gil, coordinate with the ground crew. If there isn't an immediate first-class seat available, find out who we can relocate. I'll personally handle any upgrades or refunds that need to be made." As Bergman spoke, the gate agents scrambled behind him, tapping frantically at their computer terminals. A buzz of confusion rippled through passengers still waiting in line. Some looked annoyed at the delay, while others whispered in sympathy, pieces of rumor spreading quickly. Something about a decorated colonel. They gave his seat away. "The CEO's here in person." "Please, Mr. Bergman," Colonel O'Connell began gently. "I appreciate your attentiveness, but I also don't want to disrupt the entire flight schedule. I just need to get to the capital in time for the ceremony. I'm perfectly willing to board quietly, in whatever seat's available, as long as I can walk off the plane without too much pain." Bergman shook his head resolutely. "That's not going to happen, Colonel. You won't be shoved into economy. This airline has a strict policy, or rather it should have had it strictly adhered to. You have a documented request on file, a legitimate need for certain accommodations, and you hold an honor we should recognize without question. Allow me to rectify this personally." Cliffhanger #2. As the 2 men locked eyes, Hank wondered if this sudden apology would truly translate into real change, or if it was a public show meant to soothe the press and avoid a scandal. Yet Bergman's determination appeared genuine. Without waiting for further discussion, he flicked a look toward the crowd. "Passengers, please stand by for a brief moment," he called out. "We'll announce revised boarding shortly. Thank you for your patience." Then he returned his focus to Colonel O'Connell. "Could you step with us to the podium for a moment, sir?" Hank rose, wincing slightly at the twinge in his lower back, and followed the CEO and his group. He felt as if he were in a surreal play, where the stage lights had flipped on him unexpectedly. Bergman motioned for Marissa to move aside, then navigated the computer system himself. The senior vice president, Gil, stood by with his arms folded, murmuring instructions into a phone pressed to his ear. "Colonel O'Connell's seat is going to be 1B. Bergman declared at last, scanning the available layout. "We can shift one of our own platinum travelers if needed, or I'll give up my seat the moment we board." He cast a sidelong glance at Hank. "Will 1B aisle suffice for you, sir? Of course, if you prefer the window, that can also be arranged." Hank felt a wave of gratitude. "1B would be fine," he said. "Thank you for your generosity, but there's really no need to cause a commotion. The seat I originally had was 2A, though. I did like the window, but I don't want to impose." "Absolutely not an imposition," Bergman assured him. "You'll have 2A if that's preferable, or 1B, whichever works best. Give us just a second to finalize it." Marissa tapped a couple more keys. The ticket printer whirred, spitting out a fresh boarding pass. With trembling hands, she extended it to Colonel O'Connell. Bergman accepted it first, reading it over carefully to confirm the seat had updated properly. 2A, he announced triumphantly, beaming at Hank. "Sir, we do apologize for the fiasco that left you stranded at the gate. It's been corrected, and again, I'm deeply sorry this had to happen at all. I'll be personally following up with you after the flight to ensure you're satisfied with any recompense." Cliffhanger #3. Colonel O'Connell held the new pass, wide-eyed at the swift reversal of fortune. But would the turmoil truly end once he boarded? He dipped his head in a nod of thanks. "I do appreciate all you've done. My granddaughter, she worked so hard to book that seat for me. Knowing her efforts weren't wasted, it means more than I can say." Passengers observing this exchange started to clap in a hesitant ripple, not fully understanding the exact circumstance but sensing that an injustice was being corrected. Some folks gave Hank friendly pats on the shoulder or murmured, "Thank you for your service," as he stepped away from the podium. The tension in the gate area lifted, replaced by a kind of buzzing relief. Meanwhile, Bergman turned to Marissa with a look that visibly unsettled her. "We'll discuss the breakdown in procedure once Colonel O'Connell is on board and comfortable," he said in a low voice. "Our retraining is in order. It was your responsibility to check the passenger profile. You should have seen the note regarding his reason for travel. We have a hero's desk for a reason, and it should never have gotten to this point." Marissa swallowed hard and nodded. Hank, overhearing that stern admonition, felt a pang of sympathy for her. Though she had dismissed him earlier, it was quite possible she was juggling more tasks than she could handle. Still, a line had been crossed, a line about decency and respect, and Colonel O'Connell had learned the hard way that sometimes one must demand recognition for a need instead of waiting quietly. Cliffhanger #4. Bergman offered his arm. "Sir, let me escort you to the jet bridge." Would the rest of the flight go smoothly, or was another surprise waiting? Hank allowed himself to be guided, noticing the hush that fell over passengers at the gate. A young woman, possibly heading home from college, whispered, "He's some kind of decorated veteran, right?" Another man in a business suit responded quietly, "Yes, they messed up his seat." The hush grew as Bergman approached the still-open boarding door, forging a path for Hank to enter first. For a moment, Colonel O'Connell paused at the threshold, catching his own reflection in the glass panels overlooking the tarmac. He saw a man who had once leapt fearlessly from helicopters, leading soldiers in the worst conditions imaginable. Could this small victory mean anything in comparison to those days? Maybe not, but he sensed it held symbolic importance, a statement that no one should push aside those who had served, especially when they were simply asking for a seat that didn't twist their aging bones into knots. Taking a resolute step forward, Hank walked onto the jet bridge, new boarding pass in hand, the intangible weight of an entire airline's apology resting on his shoulders. He also felt flickers of hope for how corporations might respond when confronted by a genuine mistake. Sometimes a single phone call to the right person could shift the course of events in a remarkable way. He exhaled, letting tension ebb. Bergman, keeping pace, chattered softly about ensuring Hank's future flights would be problem-free. "We'll take care of you," the CEO repeated, sincerity in his voice. "Thank you for giving us the chance to make it right." Hank simply nodded, grateful that at least one part of the journey was being restored to its rightful track, approx 700 words. The flight attendant at the Boeing 857 door was visibly startled when she saw the CEO himself stepping on board with a distinguished older passenger in tow. Her face flickered through confusion, then understanding, as Bergman leaned in and spoke quietly into her ear. She gestured toward the cabin's front row. Colonel O'Connell, adjusting his coat, moved down the narrow aisle, conscious of the curious gazes from seated travelers. Cliffhanger #1. Was everyone in on this sudden rescue, or would more awkward moments arise in the close confines of first class? A man in a charcoal suit, occupying seat 1A, looked up from his tablet just as Bergman tapped him gently on the shoulder. "Sir," the CEO said, stooping to speak softly, "I'm afraid I must ask a favor. We'd like to move you over to 2C. To accommodate Colonel O'Connell here, the airline will extend a complimentary upgrade on your next flight for the trouble." The passenger blinked, uncertain. Then, noticing Hank's silver hair and gentle gaze, he nodded with what appeared to be genuine respect. He rose immediately, collecting his briefcase. "Anything for the Colonel," he murmured, stepping aside so Hank could settle in. Relieved, Hank thanked the man under his breath, adjusting himself carefully into the plush seat, mindful of any twinge to his back. Bergman hovered a moment longer, ensuring the arrangement was final, then patted Hank on the shoulder. "Someone from our leadership team will be in touch upon arrival," he said,
Hank took a measured breath, letting his body relax into the soft cushion. Even the gentle background hum felt different up here. Next to him, the flight attendant offered a warm smile. "We'll be taking off soon, Colonel," she said, voice tinged with deference. "Anything you need before we close the door?" He considered declining, but the tension of the past hour still churned in his stomach. "A bit of water if it's no trouble," he admitted. A minute later, she returned with a tall glass and a cloth napkin, a small courtesy he was grateful for. She also sneaked a quick nod of thanks that seemed to say, "I'm sorry for what happened." Hank acknowledged her with a gentle pat on the arm, grateful that at least in this moment, the mood had shifted to kindness rather than confrontation. Cliffhanger. #2. Would the rest of the journey sail smoothly, or could the fiasco resurface once the plane was airborne? As the other passengers filed in, guided by the cabin crew, it struck Hank that he was suddenly in the center of a small spectacle. People glimpsed him as they passed down the aisle, some sneaking discreet photos on their phones, others flashing respectful nods. One younger man with a baseball cap paused to whisper, "Thank you for your service," and Hank quietly answered, "You're welcome." He overheard bits of conversation. "That's the gentleman the CEO came for. Must be a big deal." He felt a flash of self-consciousness, unused to this sphere of attention. Still, the seat's comfort offered a relief that was almost medicinal for his aching joints. Soon, the aircraft door closed with a mechanical thump. Overhead bins latched, seatbelts clicked, and a flight attendant launched into the safety briefing with the usual routine. The engine hum deepened, and the plane began to push back, rolling toward the runway. In that lull, Hank found his mind drifting to what awaited him at his destination. Tomorrow's ceremony, set in one of the most storied halls of government, would be filled with dignitaries and old comrades. Each of them had demonstrated exceptional patriotism, even under conditions that shredded the nerves of the bravest souls. Hank swallowed, wishing he could simply appear there without the fuss of traveling. Yet he recognized how life's journeys, however bumpy, often led to the moments that taught real lessons about gratitude. Cliffhanger #3. Reflecting on old memories, Hank wondered whether the day's events would overshadow the purpose of his trip. The plane gathered speed, pressed back into his seat. Hank closed his eyes, exhaling slowly through his nose. It was an old technique to calm pre-flight jitters. Though fear wasn't the issue, he had once soared in military choppers under actual enemy fire. It was more the emotional weight of the fiasco at the gate, the swirl of frustration and relief still settling. Within minutes, the jet unclasped itself from the ground, ascending into the sky, dusk light washing across the window as tufted clouds drifted by. A fleeting sense of freedom replaced tension in Hank's chest. He reminded himself that, for all its flaws, the world still contained people like his granddaughter, caring, determined souls who believed respect should never be bartered away. As the seatbelt sign blinked off, the lead flight attendant emerged. "Colonel, we have a dinner menu for you." She handed over a neatly printed card showing entrees and beverages. He hadn't expected much appetite, but the offer was too kind to refuse. The younger attendant who had brought him water lingered. "Sir," she began in a low voice, "I'd love to let our pilot know you're on board. He comes from a military family, and he'd be honored to greet you if you're comfortable with that." Hank felt a wave of humility. "Depends on how busy he is," he answered softly. Shortly after, the pilot made a brief announcement from the flight deck, acknowledging they had a heroic passenger aboard. The statement avoided naming him outright, but it concluded with a heartfelt "Gentlemen like this remind us why we do what we do." A smattering of applause arose from various seats, and Hank tipped his head, cheeks warming at the attention. Cliffhanger #4. He began to wonder if this acknowledgement would ripple further, perhaps outside the plane, maybe even into the press, but quickly dismissed the thought. The simple relief of being treated decently was enough for now. Throughout the flight, the staff checked on him frequently, topping off his water and offering small treats. It was more doting than he'd typically allow, but after the gate ordeal, he surrendered to quiet appreciation. Every time he tried to shrug off the gratitude, the attendants insisted, "Please, let us make this flight right." He couldn't help but think of Alex, hoping that none of these developments would worry her. She was likely expecting a simple text once he landed safely, but Hank suspected the story wouldn't stay silent long. People had recorded footage of the surprise arrival by Bergman, the CEO. Social media had a penchant for blowing such stories wide. Being singled out in truth was never something he enjoyed. Yet if the ordeal demonstrated that an average person, especially a veteran, needn't languish under crushing indifference, maybe the attention served a purpose. As the cabin lights dimmed and dinner trays were distributed, the plane soared over quiet plains far below. Hank could just make out city lights in the distance, tiny clusters glowing in the night. His seat felt nothing less than luxurious compared to the dreaded 32B, and the moral victory gave him a sense of calm. In the hush of the flight, he recalled the war-torn nights of decades past, all the grit, the alliances born in hardship. In some ways, fighting an indifferent system back home required just as firm a spirit. Cliffhanger, #5. Would landing bring resolution or spark a broader outcome for him and future passengers in similar predicaments? Colonel Hank O'Connell took a careful bite of the dinner roll provided, tasting not just flour and salt, but also relief. He reflected on the day's strange predicament, how a quick call between the lines of ordinary red tape had rallied top brass to champion his cause. The next few hours in the air might finally offer solace, a moment to gather strength before a formal ceremony honoring valor he still felt mainly belonged to those who never made it home. Yet here he was, continuing to carry their memory, their sacrifice, into the places where respect often hinged on a seat assignment, approx 700 words. The cabin lights dimmed further, and the faint glow along the aisle reminded Colonel O'Connell of nighttime flights from another era, when passenger jets weren't nearly as large or as packed. He eased against the headrest, trying to heed the flight attendant's request that he relax and let them handle everything. Strange as it felt, he realized his body needed the downtime. The countless travails he'd undergone in service had conditioned him to endure, but age introduced new strains that even an iron will couldn't always keep at bay. He closed his eyes and heard the low buzz of conversation drifting from the galley. Two attendants were likely discussing the sudden commotion that had just played out, their voices tinged with astonishment. Everyone wanted the details. He couldn't blame them. CEOs rarely appeared at gates riding on a wave of panic just to correct a seating error. Cliffhanger, #1. As the plane cruised closer to altitude, Hank found himself wondering what kind of firestorm might erupt below. Would the gate agent be penalized harshly, or could there be redemption waiting? He pictured the tense moment when Bergman had confronted the gate team. In his past, Hank had witnessed superior officers dressing down subordinates, typically with words so sharp they left an entire room hushed. But something about the airport's public setting made it even more jarring. Although Hank was undeniably grateful for Bergman's intervention, he also felt a thread of compassion for the agent who had, in all likelihood, just followed a rigid but flawed protocol. Yet accountability still mattered. The colonel had learned that lessons often came by holding someone's feet to the fire, ensuring they recognized the gravity of their actions. Perhaps that too was part of real respect, demanding that others rise to the standard of decency. He sighed, massaging his knuckles. The flight attendant reappeared at his side, leaning in with a quiet smile. "Sir, the captain has asked if you'd like to visit the cockpit once we land, just for a moment, if security protocols allow. He says it would be an honor to shake your hand. No pressure at all, though." Hank felt the corners of his mouth lift. "I wouldn't want to inconvenience anyone, but if it's permitted, yes, I'd be happy to say hello." With a grateful nod, the attendant floated away to continue her duties, leaving Hank to the hush of first class. A few seats away, a businessman scrolled intently through spreadsheets on a laptop. Directly across the aisle, an older woman wearing headphones closed her eyes as if lost in classical music. All of them were likely oblivious to the significance of Colonel O'Connell's impending trip, the reason first class truly mattered to him. Cliffhanger, #2. In the quiet space, he caught himself in an unexpected swirl of memory. Were those recollections something he still had the energy to face? He slipped into a half-doze, images forming behind his eyelids. A nighttime flight in a military cargo plane, the cabin frigid, the thunder of the engines making conversation nearly impossible. He recalled how battered his unit felt after long missions, each man leaning against the metal hull, eyes glazed from exhaustion. During one infamous deployment, the wounded from his platoon overflowed the limited cots and spilled into every available corner, each trying to stabilize a friend. Hank himself bore a gash on his left arm that night, but he had hardly noticed it, more concerned with ensuring everyone else survived. Requesting special treatment never crossed his mind back then. They were all battered, all equal, forging an unbreakable bond. Now, decades later, as he reclined in the plush seat, he felt a twinge of guilt. Would his old comrades sneer at such fuss, or applaud that he'd finally caught a break after everything he'd gone through? Possibly both. Sometimes recognition carried an odd weight, part relief, part regret. Cliffhanger, #3. He drifted back to the present, wondering if this flight's remarkable turn of events might become an enduring story told around too many dinner tables. Beneath his hand, the phone in his jacket pocket vibrated softly. Surprised, he withdrew it, noticing a text message from an unfamiliar number. "Col O'Connell, this is Olivia Matthews, Senior VP at Skycon course. Just to confirm, upon arrival, we will have a liaison guide you to your connecting transport. The CEO insists. Thank you once again, and we apologize for everything." A faint smile curled along Hank's lips,
Despite the day's turmoil, the airline leadership continued to prove they meant what they said about making amends. He thumbed a polite thank you in reply, then placed the phone face down on his thigh. Part of him wondered how many more official apologies he'd receive before the trip ended. Outside the window, the sky had turned the color of ink, stars faintly visible above layers of wispy clouds. The seatbelt sign blinked on momentarily as the aircraft encountered a patch of turbulence, making the fuselage quiver gently. Hank's mind wandered to his granddaughter, Alex, imagining the satisfaction on her face if she knew about the swift corporate meltdown in his defense. She had always been the type to challenge authority when it didn't align with fairness. Cliffhanger #4. He tapped out a short message to her. On flight. Everything's fine. We'll call once landed, then paused before sending. Should he reveal the ordeal now, or keep it for later? Deciding it might worry her unnecessarily, he allowed a moment of caution to pass. Alex had enough on her mind with her own duties. No need to spark alarm. Instead he typed, "Safe, headed your way, see you soon," and saved the full story for when they'd have the chance to talk in person. The flight attendant returned to check on him again, offering an extra blanket and a small pillow. Though the climate in the cabin felt pleasant, Hank accepted them. In a lower voice she added, "If you need something stronger than water to help you rest, we do have a variety of beverages." Hank let out a soft chuckle. "Thank you, but my doctors recommended I stick to less adventurous refreshments, at least when flying. I'll sip a bit of warm tea if that's available." Her face lit up. "I'll bring some right away." Cliffhanger #5. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Hank wondered fleetingly if the pilot's welcome might be overshadowed by corporate spectacle. Would every step now become a public relations opportunity? In the back of his mind, he acknowledged the tension between sincere gratitude and showy remorse. The CEO had seemed earnest, but corporate culture often demanded big gestures when a camera might be rolling. Everyone on board, from the passengers to the flight attendants, appeared supportive though, so he tried to let any cynicism slip away. He glanced around the refined first-class cabin, the first time he'd gotten a chance to observe it calmly. Each seat had its own small reading lamp, a personal screen, and generous legroom. It made him think of Alex's smile if she knew how comfortable he was now, a world away from the cramped middle seat that might have left him stiff and miserable by flight's end. She would be happy, and that lifted his spirits. Cliffhanger #6. He caught a breath, remembering the bigger picture. Would the final stretch of his journey hold any more twists, or had fate already played its best card? The tea arrived, fragrant steam curling gently over the rim of a porcelain cup. Hank clasped it with both hands, savoring the warmth. Sometimes, small kindnesses like a proper cup of tea carried more meaning than grand apologies. He took an unhurried sip, letting the aromatic comfort seep into him. In a short while, they'd begin descent, wheels would touch the tarmac, and the next phase of this unexpected saga would unfold. For now, he was content to let the airborne hush cradle him, a reminder that not all challenges had to be overcome through force. Some were resolved through a single well-placed call and a flood of good intentions, no matter how overdue they might be. By the time the seatbelt sign flickered on again, the aircraft had begun its gentle descent, and Colonel O'Connell felt the change in altitude produce a subtle pressure in his ears. He tilted his head to ease the sensation, closing his eyes briefly. The scent of brewed tea still lingered, and he drained the last lukewarm sip before carefully setting the cup aside. All around him, little rituals of landing began, tray tables folding up, blankets and pillows being tucked away. The flight attendants verifying overhead bins were securely latched. Cliffhanger #1. Would the airport's arrivals area greet Hank with yet another turn of events, or had the day's drama already peaked? Before he could let his thoughts wander too far, the capo of first class, an attendant named Erin, paused at his row, gesturing with an apologetic smile. "Colonel, I was asked to let you know that when we finish taxiing, if you'd like, the captain will welcome you up front. Just tap the call button if you feel up to it." He nodded, still marveling at how swiftly the airline staff now bent to accommodate his every need. It was an immense contrast from the frigid reception he'd received at the gate. As the plane dropped below the clouds, lights from the city stretched out in glowing rows, reminding Hank of nighttime convoys, long columns of vehicles inching forward under carefully managed rules and signals. The city looked peaceful from this vantage, unaware of the personal battle he'd fought just to remain in seat 2A. When the landing gear engaged with a muted thud, a shiver coursed through the cabin, and the runway's dance of orange beacons came into focus. Cliffhanger #2. Hank braced for the possibility of sudden turbulence on approach, a flash of old memories nudging at his nerves. But the landing was smooth, the plane's tires meeting asphalt with a momentary screech, then rolling into a controlled deceleration. Hank felt a sigh of relief ripple through him. He was at last in the city he needed to be in. Reaching into the overhead compartment, he carefully retrieved his slim carry-on, taking care not to aggravate his back. He paused, noticing how the flight attendants hovered close, apparently eager to help. "Colonel, let me get that," one offered. "You can relax until the aisle clears." He hesitated, then handed over his small bag with a word of thanks. Soon the door to the cockpit cracked open, and the captain, wearing crisp epaulets on his uniform, stepped into the cabin. A smattering of passengers further back craned their necks, some still impatient to deplane, others aware that something special was unfolding. Cliffhanger #3. Hank wondered, would this moment remain private or transform into one more public display? The captain approached with open admiration. "Colonel, it's an honor to have you aboard," he said quietly, clasping Hank's hand in a firm grip. "Sky Concourse should have gotten your seating right from the start, but I'm glad we at least corrected it before takeoff." He glanced away with a slight frown, as if angered by the earlier mistake. "In my family, we've got a strong line of service members, so I can promise you nobody in my cockpit would ever knowingly disrespect a decorated veteran." Hank murmured his gratitude, a rush of warmth in his chest that felt entirely separate from the airline's official posture. These personal exchanges meant more to him, these little acknowledgements from individuals, rather than from the corporate machine. He followed the captain forward, stepping briefly into the cockpit doorway. Light glowed from a dozen digital panels, and the co-pilot swiveled around, smiling wide in greeting. "You folks run a fine ship here," Hank said, gesturing at the sleek controls. "I used to fly on cargo planes, but never anything as sophisticated as this." The co-pilot chuckled, replying that they too admired the grit of military flyers from older generations. For a moment the conversation felt like bridging two worlds, one of advanced avionics and one of memories where survival often hinged on simpler, more rugged aircraft. Cliffhanger #4. A gentle tap on Hank's shoulder reminded him that time was limited. Would he be whisked through arrivals, or caught in another unexpected flurry? Emerging from the cockpit, he found several crew members forming a small corridor, clearing the aisle so he could exit ahead of the crowd. Hank never liked jumping lines. He'd always maintained the practice of wait your turn, but their sincerity was evident, and soon he was stepping onto the jet bridge with his bag in hand, flanked by two airline employees who introduced themselves as part of a special passenger relations team. The hum of the terminal whirled around him, darker windows reflecting the overhead fluorescence in dull streaks. One of the airline reps, a young man named Trevor, motioned toward the corridor leading to baggage claim. "Colonel, we'll escort you. There's a cart if you prefer not to walk." Mr. Bergman's instructions were explicit. "We're to assist in any way." Hank blinked, momentarily dazed by the swirling sense of guilt and gratitude. "I can walk," he said, forcing a small chuckle. "A little distance won't kill me, but thanks for the offer." Cliffhanger #5. The group started forward, moving past weary travelers eager to be on their way. Would rumors of his undone seat assignment still echo in these halls? Trevor tapped a tablet as they proceeded. "Your luggage is being pulled to the side, so you won't have to wait at the carousel," he explained. "And there's a private car waiting outside, courtesy of Skycon, course. We hope that helps simplify your trip." Hank's heart thudded faster. It felt surreal to receive so much attention. He thought about the old days, when coming home meant dusty airfields with not a soul to greet them, except for medical staff prepping for the next evacuation. So many years had passed since then. Down an escalator, and around a corner, they arrived at a quieter zone of the terminal. As promised, a black sedan sat waiting near a roped-off area. Behind the driver stood a dignified older woman in a crisp suit, holding a small sign that read, "Welcome, Colonel Henry O'Connell." That first name felt almost unfamiliar. It had been Hank to nearly everyone his entire life. She lowered the sign at once and introduced herself. "I'm Pamela from the corporate office. Let me take your carry-on. This car is for you whenever you're ready." Cliffhanger #6. Hank swallowed, scanning the overnight terminal staff, the nearly empty rows of seats, and the late hour. Was it always this quiet, or had the airline truly paved a private path for him? He wrestled briefly with the emotion building in his chest. This was a far cry from being told 32B. Despite the wave of courtesy, a small part of him still felt the sting of that initial dismissal. But for now, he set aside the memory as he stepped toward the sedan. Tomorrow's schedule beckoned, a White House event, a chance to stand among fellow honorees, and a brief, meaningful nod from the highest officers in the land. He cast a final glance back at Trevor and the others. "Thank you," he said simply, each syllable saturated with relief and humility. Then he ducked into the back seat, carry-on nestled by his side, and exhaled as the door thunked shut. The engine purred without strain, carrying him smoothly away from the gate and into the city lights. Approx 700 words,